Okay, can we start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You are all welcome to one of our good evenings of the Apetau Forum. And today our guest speaker is Professor Ali Shehadeh. Ali Shehadeh is a professor of applied linguistics and TESOL in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, College of Education, United Arab Emirates University, and he is the coordinator of the Master of Education program. He was also chair for 2 terms and professor in the Department of Linguistics in the United Arab Emirates University. Dr. Shehadeh's research interests center on second language acquisition, task-based language teaching and learning, L2 writing research and instruction, academic publishing, non-native English-speaking teachers, and in TESOL, he has taught under and postgraduate courses in applied linguistics, second language acquisition, language education, and TESOL. He supervised or sat on the panels of over 50 master's and doctoral dissertations in the United Arab Emirates and in the region as well as international sessions. Dr. Shehadeh published in a range of top-tier Q1 research journals in the field, including language learning and TESOL, including language learning, the journal, TESOL Quarterly, TESOL Journal, ELT Journal, System, Journal of Applied Linguistics, and Journal of Second Language Writing. Professor Shehadeh has over 85 publications. He is well-published, widely published scholar. These include refereed journals, journal articles, book chapters, edited books, encyclopedia entries, specialized magazine articles, forum articles, and book reviews. Dr. Shehadeh was part of the largest 8-volume encyclopedia in the world on English language teaching, titled The TESOL Encyclopedia of English Language Teaching, published by Wiley-Blackwell, USA 2018, being the editor of Volume 2, Approaches and Methods in English for Speakers of Other Languages. Actually, I was lucky to be invited by Professor Ali to contribute 2 entries to this volume and this encyclopedia. The encyclopedia won the Association of American Publishers Award 2019 for the best multi-volume reference in humanities. Professor Shehadeh's scholarship and professional contributions have won him over 10 awards and prizes locally and internationally. The latest one being the United Arab Emirates University Award for Excellence in Teaching for 2021-22. Whatever we say in this regard, we may not be able to just to cover the accomplishments and the achievements of Professor Ali Shehadeh. He is an outstanding scholar in the field of applied linguistics and TESOL. And I have met him actually in many conferences in the country and outside. Today, he will be talking about task-based language teaching and the focus on form in this language teaching approach. I don't want to take much time of your precious time, Professor Ali. So now the floor is yours, and you may have 40 to 45 minutes for your presentation, and then we will open the floor to discussion and questions. Professor Ali, the floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum, Jamia. Thank you very much, Professor Shehdeh, for the kind introduction. I am humbled by your introduction. I hope you all can see me and hear me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to thank Dr. Dina Salman and her team for the kind invitation. I am honored by the invitation, and I would like to thank you, the audience, for attending this talk. And I'll make a special thanks again to the colleagues and doctoral students and other students from the university and from Kuwait and other Gulf countries who have joined this talk. I'd like to say that my experience with Apetau is a rich one. It goes back 20 years in time to the year 2000 when I attended I think it was the second Apetau International Conference. And in 2003, as I attended the third one. At the time, I was in Saudi Arabia, and it was a great honor to meet Professor Shehdeh, Professor Jihad Hamdan, Dr. Zboon, Dr. Louis Muqaddish, late Louis Muqaddish, Rajai Khanji. So it was great, and I'm happy to make a revisit, a U-turn to Apetau again. Again, I am honored by the invitation and by the introduction. All right. So, Dr. Dina, if I were to share my screen, then I think I can do that. And let me see if my sharing is successful. I hope it is all right now, like this. Is that all right? I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, yes, it's all right. It's excellent.
Okay. You all hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please, thank you. Now, this is the title of my talk today, Focus on Form and Task-Based Language Teaching. It looks a little bit technical, in particular the first part, focus on form. Simply meaning, focus on form meaning how to focus on the formal properties, meaning grammar, vocabulary, accuracy, and so on, when we teach task-based language teaching. So that is more or less the main goal of this presentation. And the main goal, really, the ultimate goal is how to enable the teacher to focus on the formal properties when he or she teaches task-based language teaching, which is the latest and the most comprehensive method to language teaching, I would say, in the world in the last 25 to 30 years. And here is a structure of the talk. First, I will give a background to and contextualize TBLT, and then move on to look what TBLT is for those who among you who do not know what TBLT or have little idea about it. So we'll spend some time on what TBLT is, and then what is a task or cluster of tasks within the TBLT framework. And in part 4, we'll look at the difference between what we call focus on form and focus on forms. And in part 5, which is, if you like, the pride of the talk, how to incorporate focus on form and task-based language teaching. And finally, I'll give an illustrative example. All right. And I hope to finish within 30-35 minutes maximum. All right. So that we have good time for Q&A, discussion, and feedback and comments and so on. All right. So part 1, this is a quick background to task-based language teaching and to contextualize it. If we look at the approaches and methods to language teaching, in particular English language teaching, there are more than 15, in fact, around 22 approaches and methods. So, for example, we have the oldest one, grammar translation method. We have the direct method. We have the audiolingual method. We have the functional notional approach. We have the natural approach. We have the cooperative language learning. We have the total physical response. We have the structural approach, content-based instruction, suggestopedia, sheltered instruction, the silent way, the lexical approach, project-based learning, communicative language teaching, and of course, task-based language teaching. So there are more than 15. Here we have 17 or 18, and in fact, we have few more. So we have more than 15 approaches and methods to language teaching, in particular when it comes to English language teaching. Now, if we look at these approaches and we try to classify them, we can classify them more or less safely under 3 types. We have the structural methods and approaches, we have the functional approaches, and we have the functional structural approaches. All right, I will take you through a quick journey over these 3 types of approaches and methods. So the structural methods and approaches, they are the pre-1960s. They were here for hundreds of years, including, for example, grammar translation. These are the key ones: grammar translation, audiolingual method, and the direct method. Now, and of course, a structural approach. Now, these approaches, the traditional ones, they focus on the language forms. Teach language in the second language, teaching the form, grammar, vocabulary, correctness, accuracy, things like that, at the expense of the language functions. So you can see the language form is the bigger picture. Language functions are somehow given secondary role, or probably almost completely neglected. Now, these approaches and methods, they emphasize the authoritative role of the teacher. When we talk about teacher-centered instruction, teacher-centered education, they focus on imitation, copying, mimicking, memorization. Sometimes it's called mimicking and memorization. Rote learning, learning by heart, accuracy, correctness, focus on grammar, focus on the formal properties of the language, explicit instruction, teacher correction, and non-tolerance of mistakes. So these are the traditional approaches that are the pre-1960. If we move on to the 1960s and so on, with the rise of Chomsky and Krashen, we have the functional approaches that were popular between, say, the 1960s and the early 1990s. We have a number of them. Three of them are the communicative language teaching approach, the functional notional approach, and the natural approach. And here we can see a move from one extreme to the other. Instead of focusing on the language structures, the focus here is on the language functions, all right? Teaching content, ideas, teaching communication rather than form, with the language structures given, if you like, side role, or maybe completed almost entirely or completely. All right. Now, these approaches, they emphasize learner autonomy, learner independence, which is called student-centered education, student-centered learning, fluency, focus on meaning, on ideas, focus on content, communication, no correction of learner errors, for example, like Krashen's natural approach, teacher-student and the student-student interaction, group and peer work. All right. So these are the approaches that focus on language functions. Now, if we move on to the last, say, 25 to 30 years, we have the functional structural approaches that take into consideration both the language functions and the language forms structures. This started in the mid-1990s until now. And I can identify three key approaches here, which are TBLT, or task-based language teaching, cooperative language learning, and the project-based teaching, or sometimes we call it project-based learning. Now, these approaches, they focus, first of all, on the language functions, but they do not forget the language structures and forms. And you can see the two circles here, the two bubbles, they are almost there, but the main purpose, the main focus goes for the language functions, and then taken into consideration the language structures and forms. So here, it is very much like the second type, but more to go beyond that. These approaches are also like the ones, they are learner-centered as well. They emphasize collaborative peer and group work in second language learning. They promote learner autonomy and self-directed learning, purposeful communication, focus on meaning and focus on form, focus on fluency and focus on accuracy and complexity, depth of knowledge in the learner. They emphasize the multiple benefits of collaborative peer and group work in second language learning, including the co-construction of knowledge, creation of knowledge by learners when they work together. All right. So we can see that the move has moved from, if we look at that globally, from behaviorism, that was the first type, all right, behaviorist language learning, to mentalism, Chomsky and colleagues, that is the second one, focusing on function. And now we have the sociocultural theory that takes into consideration both the external factors and internal factors, both content and form, and both meaning and structural properties of the language. Now, task-based language teaching falls within the latest category. All right, it is a functional structural approach. It is mainly functional approach, but again, takes into consideration the structural approach, and that's why I consider it functional structural approach. So what is task-based language teaching? As a definition here, it is a functional structural approach. It is an educational framework for second and foreign language learning and teaching, and it is a teaching methodology. So I'm saying here, it is a framework. It is not just a teaching methodology. It is a framework, meaning it is a philosophy of language teaching and language learning. And we have a lot of research in the last 25, 30 years on TBLT, for researchers, for teachers, for professionals, for curriculum designers, for materials writers. So it is a framework, a whole framework for language teaching and learning. At the same time, it is a teaching methodology in the classroom to be used by the classroom teacher, right? In which classroom tasks constitute the main focus of instruction. In other words, the syllabus in the TPLT environment is organized around tasks and activities rather than in terms of grammar or vocabulary. So the guiding principle is to give students tasks and activities rather than to start with grammar and vocabulary. TPLT is a student-centered approach, focuses on the learner, on the student, to learning. It emphasizes learner-centered teaching. It makes the learner central to the whole teaching and learning process, right from planning to teaching and then assessment. So the learner is involved in all aspects and stages and the steps of the teaching and learning process, right from the very beginning, planning, teaching, and assessment. And like I said, we have a lot of research that has gone into all these three areas. When we talk about task-based language teaching, the key word is task. What is a task then? What is a task? What is the task? Classroom task. We have a number of definitions. Now you can see here my definition, and again that of Freud, Ellis, and others. Okay. In this definition, we can see it is an activity. Of course, it is an activity. But what kind of activity is it? Activity that has non-linguistic purpose or goal. So when students communicate, they do not have in mind to speak correctly, accurately. They do not have in mind to say the simple present tense or progressive or whatever correctly. That is not the focus. So the focus is not on the on language. So it is non-linguistic purpose or goal, but they have a goal. Do something, goal-oriented. And then it has a clear outcome, something to achieve. It has an outcome. And it can focus on one or more than one of the language skills, like reading, speaking, listening, and writing, and so on. And it focuses on meaning, focus on meaning rather than on grammar. And the fourth criteria, it should reflect real-world language use. Right? So these are the four characterizing features of an activity or task within the task-based language teaching framework. It has a goal-oriented. They are not communicating for nothing, for a goal, and they achieve an outcome. And then they focus on content, on ideas and communication, rather than on form, on grammar. And then it is authentic. It is not artificial. It is a task that we see it in the real world. Okay. Now, here we have some examples. There are many types of tasks, and here I give you just briefly for your benefit some examples of tasks. We have information gap tasks that involve organizing given information. For example, arranging historical events in chronological order, ordering pictures to make a story. Opinion exchange tasks, exchanging opinion with your partner, with a friend, with peers. For example, tasks that require the exchange of an opinion. For example, with gender education or any opinion exchange. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? We have what we call the jigsaw tasks that require speakers to exchange given information, specific information. For example, completing a partial missing chart. So, for example, if we have 3 or 4 students working together, student A should communicate before student C can communicate. So it should be A, B, and C. Problem-solving tasks that require the exchange of information to solve a problem. For example, how to reduce environmental pollution. All right, an example. And of course, you can find hundreds or thousands of examples. And another type of task is decision-making tasks that require the exchange of opinions and making decisions or reaching unanimity, ijma'. All right, for example, how to plan an educational trip. Right, the use of artificial intelligence in education, and nowadays the use of ChatGPT in education, and of course you can have many types. So these are all illustrative examples. And like Michael Long said, a task can be any 1,001 tasks that you can think of. Even painting a wall, even ordering food on the telephone, even making hotel reservation, making airline reservation. It could be anything, provided that you are focusing on content, on ideas, it is authentic, and it has an outcome, and it is goal-oriented. All right. Now, what is the difference between focus and form and focus and form? Remember, the title of my talk is focus and form. We need to make that difference between distinction between focus and form and focus and form. Focus and form refers to the place of grammar and other formal properties of the language, second language, like vocabulary, pronunciation, correctness, and accuracy. So focusing on the formal properties of the language in the task-based language teaching. So that is focus and form, how to focus on the formal properties of the language. In other words, how to teach grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, correctness, accuracy within the framework of TPLT. But focus and forms with S at the end and capital S, as you can see on the slide, refers to the traditional way of teaching the formal properties of the language, traditional way of teaching. So how teaching grammar explicitly, teaching vocabulary explicitly, teaching pronunciation explicitly. For example, like the audiolingual method of presentation, practice, production. So you start with the language, with the grammar, all right, and then you have the practice and production and other structural approaches. So that is a very important distinction between focus and form and focus and form. Focus and form here, the main focus of the task is the function, the content, the ideas, what you want to say. But focus and forms, you are only teaching grammar, you are only teaching vocabulary, you are only teaching correctness, you are only teaching pronunciation. So the starting point is completely different between focus and form and focus and forms. And of course, when we talk of TPLT, task-based language teaching, we are talking about focus on form, how to teach form within the framework of task-based language teaching. Okay, now how to do that? How to teach form, how to teach language forms like a grammar and so on within the framework of task-based language teaching. How to incorporate form in task-based language teaching. Researchers have identified the 3 options to do that, to suit the specific educational setting of the teacher. So really, this part of the presentation, part 5 and 6, they are really squarely meant for the classroom teacher within the boundaries of his or her classroom situation. So as a teacher, okay, ask me how to do that in my classroom. Okay, here it is. All right. So there are 3 options to focus on the formal properties of the language within the boundaries, within the settings, the limits of your classroom situation. We have the strong form and 2 weak forms. And each one of the weak forms has 2 options. So we have 1 strong form, 2 weak forms, and for each weak form, we have 2 options. So total, we have 5 options for a teacher to be able to focus on form in a task-based language teaching environment. So we do not need to ignore grammar completely, all right? Like communicative language teaching, like natural approach of aggression, all right? That was a big mistake. That was a big error in the 1960s, 70s until 1980s, because the grammar was neglected completely. So there was the move from teaching grammar explicitly approaches to ignoring grammar completely, mentalism and functional approaches. But here we're saying that we need to take on board both the function and the form. So how to go for function, but at the same time to cater for form. All right. So what I'm saying here, there are 5 options for the teacher to focus on the formal properties of the language, teaching grammar, vocabulary, and so on, within a TPLT environment. And I'm going to show these examples to you. All right. Now, to illustrate that, I'm going to use the practical framework for task-based language teaching. To put this in context, there are a number of frameworks that were suggested by researchers for the implementation of task-based language teaching. We have a framework by Peter Skinner, a framework by Peter Robinson, Peter Skinner's student, Peter Robinson. We have another framework by Michael Long and John Norris. And these frameworks, they have principles and some conditions. However, the most practical and the most widely used framework in the world for the implementation of task-based language teaching is the one in front of you. That is the one was created by Jane Willis and her husband, Dave Willis, in 1996, and it was developed 1998 and 2007 and so on. All right. So this is the practical one, the most widely used framework in the world by both researchers and teachers for the implementation of task-based language teaching. And as you can see in front of you here, for a task-based language teaching to be successful, first of all, we have the pre-task stage, and then we have the task cycle, and the third part, we have the language form. And I will just go very quickly over these three stages. The pre-task here, it is an introduction to the topic and task. So if I am a teacher, okay, I just introduce the topic to my students. The teacher here, I hope you can see the writing, the small one, but I'll be happy to share with you that individually or collectively later on. The teacher here explores the topic with the class. He or she highlights useful words and phrases, helps students understand task instructions and prepare. A student may hear a recording or other doing a similar task, other people doing a similar task. All right, so that is the pre-task. The task cycle has three subdivisions, components, if you like. The actual task itself, planning, and planning here doesn't mean planning before, planning within the task, and then the report. So the task cycle, we have the actual task, the students do the task itself, right, in pairs or in groups, it depends, and the teacher monitors from a distance. Once they do the task, they start to plan how to present what they have done. The students are prepared to report to the whole class orally, or maybe writing, or both, how they did the task, what they decided on, and what they have discovered. So that is planning. After they have carried out the task, so they plan how to present what they have found, what they have discovered, what they did, and so on. That's the second sub part of the task cycle. And the third one is the actual reporting, the report. Some groups present, or could be all groups, it depends on the size of the class. Some groups present their reports to the whole class, or exchange written reports and compare results. All right, so there are variations here. That is the task cycle. Once they do that, it is only at the end does the classroom teacher focus on the form, on the language, and that is the language focus. Analysis meaning look at the language issues. The students examine and discuss a specific feature of the text or transcript of the recording. So they go back and see what they have done, what kind of grammatical issues they face, grammatical problems, and so on. And then that is the practice, the very final part. Teacher conducts the practice of a new word or phrases and patterns occurring in the data, either during or after the analysis. So we can see, this is very practical. This is down to earth. We have the pre-task planning, the actual task cycle, and then focus on the language form is at the end. Now, from a quick glance, we can see now inverted the picture completely upside down from the traditional approaches. Traditional approaches, we start with the language focus. All right. For example, how to make simple present tense, how to make present continuous. All right, I am studying English. I subject am verb be, studying main verb with ing, English, and so on. Or I start with that, and then why use simple present. So it's not that way. Okay, we are starting with the actual task. Do something, and once you do it, and then you look back to see what you need to fill, what gaps you need to fill. All right. So imagine this is the task. I am a teacher. All right, so how to focus on the formal properties of the language? All right, I mentioned there are 5 options. The first one is this one, option 1, which is called the strong form. If you remember, I said we have 1 strong form and 2 weak forms. All right, let me just go back, maybe so that remind you of that. Remember, we have 1 strong form, 2 weak forms, and each of the 2 weak forms has 2 options. All right, so we have 5 options in total. All right, so the strong form, all right, it says that if you want to be faithful to the spirit of task-based language teaching, then you focus on the language properties, on the language, on grammar, vocabulary, and so on, implicitly and reactively. That means after the task, and implicitly, indirectly. All right, do not teach grammar explicitly. That is the strong form. If you are faithful to the spirit of task-based language teaching. Imagine this doesn't work. All right, implicit, reactive and implicit. Okay, what do? I go for the option 2A, which is weak form 1. It is reactive, but it is explicit. So I focus on the language aspect at the end of the task explicitly rather than implicitly. So you can see the difference between this one and this one here. Here it is implicit, but here it is explicit, and reactive the same at the end. Now, if this one doesn't work, then I do option 2B, focus on the language form explicitly like this one, but proactively before the actual task. I can focus, say, these are the words, the grammar things which are going to see in the task. I do not teach them. Just focus on them, say, draw learners' attention to them, that they will see them. All right. Now, option 1, which I said this is faithful to TBL, task-based language teaching, is called task-based language teaching. So you are faithful to that. Now, option 2 is called task-supported language teaching. Task-supported language teaching, whether it is option 2A or 2B. All right. So either you do it reactively or proactively, but you do it explicitly. Now, imagine even if option 2 again failed. What do? I have option 3A, all right, which is weak form 2, explicit and reactive, like this one, explicit and reactive, but here via non-TBLT approach. For example, like audiolingual method or structural approach. In other words, if the second option failed and didn't work, then what do? I can go to the traditional approaches like audiolingualism or structural approach and teach that explicitly, but I leave it at the end reactively. Now, what happens if even this one fails? All right, and my student does not grasp it, then I go to the final and the fifth option, all right, which is option 3B, weak form 2, explicit and proactive via non-TBLT approach. All right, so I teach that explicitly rather than reactively at the end before the task. Rather at the end of the task, sorry, I do it before the task, proactively. All right, so in other words, here I could use an option 2, A and B. I am using another approach, non-TBLT approach. It could be grammar translation, audiolingual, structural approach, whatever. Okay, so I try to do that reactively and explicitly, but if it did not work, then I can go back and do it proactively and explicitly. However, what we need to remember that the main focus is not the teaching of the grammar here. The main focus is the task. So I am preparing them for the task either before the task or after it. After is better. All right. And if that did not work, then I will go to make that before. All right. So we can see there are 5 options to focus on the language properties of the language. All right. And let me just give you finally an example here. Imagine if I give my students a task to do, decision-making task, artificial intelligence in education. All right. So I say, okay, you have a task. Now you can see here the instructions. Read this article about the UNESCO's statement on the use of artificial intelligence in education. Read it individually. Then get together with your group. 3, try to reach a consensus, unanimity, ijma', on whether your school, university should use artificial intelligence in education. Give reasons and suggest ways. 4, be prepared to give an oral presentation, 3 minutes, on your decision and the rationale for it. And finally, the instruction, you have 10 minutes to discuss your article and reach some kind of agreement. Now, if you look at this task, which I just retrieved it from the internet. So, okay, it has goal-oriented. It has an outcome. It focuses on content, on ideas, rather than on language grammar. And then it is authentic. Because at the end of the day, whether we need to use it in our classroom or not, in our institution or not, in our city or not, and so on. All right. And you can see that we prepare a report whether we need to use that in the university or not, and so on. All right. Now, once my students do that, then I will see what language issues they have faced. It could be grammar, it could be correctness, it could be pronunciation. If it is pronunciation, it could be vocabulary and so on. And then I decide on the best way forward, either to do that reactively or proactively, either to do that implicitly or explicitly. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ali, for your valuable presentation on task-based language teaching and learning. You highlighted the stages of teaching through task-based, and we hope that we learned a lot because we are all language teachers at the end, whether we teach literature or linguistics or TESOL or TEFL or whatever. Thank you very much for that. Now, the floor is open for discussion or questions. If you have any question, please.
Yeah, I raise my hand if you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ali, for this informative talk, and I really enjoyed it. I got two questions. The second one is more important, so I'll start with the least important, which is the interconnection or the overlap between method and approach. You know, some people mix that. Some people say grammar translation method. Some people consider that an approach. So anyway, the method is the physical aspect and approach is the philosophical aspect. So how would you explain that to people to differentiate between method and approach? My second question, which is very important, which is to what extent can technology contribute to these techniques or to these approaches? You know that we are in the age of artificial intelligence. Can that be taken into account when it comes to approaches and methods? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Awad, for the two questions. In response to the first question, quite often there's an overlap between an approach and a method, although they are not the same. Very brief answer, an approach is a set of principles and conditions, whereas a method, it has a specific conditions, it has a specific ways, specific strategies, principles and techniques. So for example, when we talk of cumulative language teaching, it is an approach. Why it is an approach? Because it doesn't have any specific strategies, any specific techniques, but it has a set of principles. All right. So an approach, you know, when we take it broadly, rather than small, sometimes we talk about how did you approach this this issue, this problem, this different way, the word approach here. But we're talking about teaching approach. A teaching approach is kind of a philosophical way of looking at things. So it is smaller than, if you like, theory. Okay, so we have, for example, we have behaviorist learning theory. So an approach is smaller than the theory, but it's a set of principles and maybe recommendations, maybe criteria. But a method, okay, it has a specific strategies, a specific technique, a specific ways. So it is smaller than an approach. All right. Now, the use of technology, that is very important. If you look, for example, of task-based language teaching, it is the most heavily explored approach and method, if you like, in the English language teaching world. And we have a lot of research. We have huge volumes of research. And in fact, if you look here, at least two of the shelves behind me in my own personal library on TBST, task-based language teaching. And part of that, task-based language teaching and the use of technology, including COL, computer language learning, including Wiki, including Google Docs, and including a lot of things. In fact, right now, one of my doctoral students under my supervision has researched task-based language teaching in relation to wikis. And of course, there is a lot of research to do that. And it could do even virtual reality, all right? And of course, artificial intelligence. So again, one of my students is looking into that. And I'm not saying this, you know, that they are the only people. There is a lot of research in the last 5 to 7 years of the relationship between TBST and technology, And I can think of at least one volume on TBLT and technology, and I'll be happy to provide you with a reference to that. So there is a lot of research, in particular on task-based language teaching and other things like CLIL, technology, ESP, other languages, and so on.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Excellent answer, very informative. And I also heard that your approach controls or defines your methods, and your methods defines your techniques or the task or activities. So thank you for the answer. Very, very informative. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for the question.
Questions? Yes, Dr. Mahyar.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank our director for this informative presentation. And I have a proposal. It's a kind of just if we could limit or confine our questions to the topic itself. And if we have time, we could go further, you know. Well, I have two questions. The first one is, how could we perform error correction using the TBL? So, you know, error correction is very important for students, whether we are after accuracy or fluency. So how could we perform error correction? This is the first one. And then the second question is about your reading passage, your illustrative example, Doctor, the last slide. And you said that the task should be goal-oriented. There should be an outcome, right?
Correct.
So what is your outcome? And how could we differentiate between teaching this reading?
Could we remove the screen, take off the screen?
Sorry, how could we differentiate between teaching this reading passage in the routine or the traditional way and using the TBL? Thank you so much.
That is very good. Thank you very much for that two questions. All right. So just if you just say something, what was the first question? Just one word about the first question. Error correction. Okay?
Yes.
That's very good and very important. There are multiple ways for error correction. A good teacher should have good knowledge, and I don't have time now to talk about that. I gave a whole presentation, and some of my doctoral students here, they know what I have in mind to say. When we talk about error correction, this is very important key. And a teacher, good teacher, should have good knowledge about what to correct, when to correct, who to correct, and how to correct. So with respect to what to correct, the teacher should correct global errors, not local errors. Global errors, errors that interfere with comprehension, rather than small errors. Okay, and an example I usually give, when my daughter, now she has graduated from university 16 years ago, when she was grade 3, she told me that my bag, she is too heavy because she have too much books. So imagine how many mistakes. My bag, she is too heavy because she have too much books. 4 or 5 errors. I did not correct her because these are all local errors. They do not interfere with comprehensibility. The meaning was clear. All right. Now, when I say to her, Hala, that was your language, or a few years ago, said, Dad, this is bad English. No one speaks like that. So the teacher should not correct local errors. The teacher should correct global errors that interfere with comprehensibility. Now, these are what to correct. Now, who to correct? A teacher should give the student himself or herself opportunity to correct. And if that fails, he or she should give to the peers to correct. And if that fails, I go to the teacher. Now, how to correct? How to correct? It is direct or indirect, explicit or implicit. The teacher should go for implicit correction, indirect one, for direct, explicit correction. If that did not work, then I go for explicit correction. And the final one, when to correct. All right. The teacher should correct an error, not a mistake. And of course, we should know the difference between the two. An error is an aspect of lack of competence. I don't know how to say that. I lack the capacity. That is competence. You know, shows us competence and performance. Lack of ability. So if I say, for example, I didn't sleep last night. I keep repeating that. It is competence. I lack competence. But if today I say I didn't sleep last night, and tomorrow I say I didn't sleep last night, then it is a mistake, not an error, and therefore the teacher should not correct mistakes. The teacher should
Systematic
correct
and
errors.
non-systematic.
Okay, so there is kind of pyramid on that, what to correct, who to correct, how to correct, and when to correct. All right, and of course this is a whole story. It is absolutely wonderful. Within TBLT, this also applies nicely. All right, I don't want to give more thorough answer. I'll be happy to do that, but I'd like to move on to your second question. All right, so your second question was about the task itself. Okay, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now this is very important. All right. Now, the difference between this one and the traditional way of teaching, in the traditional way of teaching, I like my students to read the passage and understand it and react to it and then to show their understanding. We are here? No. Understanding is only one aspect, one component of the text. One, I like them to focus on ideas, on outcome. The outcome, I should not determine it myself as a teacher. If I predetermine the outcome, that is not good teaching. It is up to them to find the outcome that they agree on. All right. If at the end of the day, I like them to come up with outcome that I expect, that I anticipate, it is not good teaching. It is not good strategy. They should reach the outcome that they agree on, that they find fit. And therefore, this is unpredictable. All right. And they come up with ideas beyond comprehension and remembering. They can synthesize ideas. They transfer ideas. They apply ideas. So they go beyond comprehension and remembering to working with ideas. And while they do that, the language issues arise. And when they arise, I come here as a teacher and deal with them in the proper manner. I hope I responded to you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure. I think there is a question by Fajar. Fajar is raising her hand.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Ali. Thank you for a very interesting talk, as always. Sir, in your opinion, what factors influence educators' decision to start with the weak proactive form of introducing grammar points at the beginning of the task? Because utilizing a weak proactive form normally happens before educators and learners reach the last task cycle, if I understood it correctly. So that's even before reaching the point of realizing that they hadn't worked. So what do you think are the factors that could influence educators' decision to start with the weak form, a proactive weak form, as opposed to waiting until the end and then maybe trying with a strong form and then the other weak reactive form?
Thank you, Fajar. Excellent question. All right, like the other questions, very good and excellent questions. There is no specific prescription. It depends on the context in which you are teaching, your knowledge of students, their background. For example, if you come to a context where students expect you to teach the language explicitly and you go immediately to the extreme form of not teaching grammar, they will not listen to you, they will not respect you, and say, you are not a good teacher, you are not teaching me grammar. All right, but at the end of the day, you need to take them to that point that grammar is not the main focus, is not the focal point. All right, in that case, then I would start with the grammar aspect, not for the sake of the grammar aspect itself, but to prepare them for the task. And once they do the task, they enjoy doing the task and they forget the grammar. So the grammar was a tool to do the task rather than the task to use the grammar. All right. Now, if later on you feel that your students are really happy with that, you go from being proactive to make it reactive. If you see my point, right? And yes, after that, you can move around. So you have 5 options. There is no one best option, really. The best one, okay, the right word, the best one depends on the specific context in which you are teaching. So you have your learners, their age, their cultural background, their social background, their expectations, even sometimes their parents, even sometimes the school administration plays a role. But the point is that if you know what you are doing and you are adapting, you are adjusting your teaching to do what is right, to align your teaching with effective teaching methodology, then you are a great teacher. You don't want to do what they like because they like it and because you have no option. This is not the right way. All right. So you know what to do, but you need to compromise, and then you have a goal how to get them to the right position. And so initially there might be a resistance measure. Right? You have teacher factors, you have students factors, you have administrative factors, you have family factors, a number of factors and constraints. If you look at my introduction to my book in 2012 on task-based language teaching in foreign language context, you will see a host of factors. Nevertheless, doesn't mean that the factors will stop you from doing what you think is the right way to teach, and that teaching is aligned with effective teaching strategies. But we need to be flexible and we need to adapt. So the word adaptation is the right word here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Professor Shehadeh has a question, and then we will move to Dr. Sayyid.
Thank you very much, Professor Ali, for this very interesting talk. We have missed such talks, yes, lately.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Professor Fareh, for your introduction, nice, brief introduction to this seminar. Now, a number of issues. One of them is the fact that there are so many approaches and methods in second language learning. And you have presented a list with some probably 20 approaches or methods, but still this field can accommodate more and more approaches and perspectives. And I would like to highlight another perspective really, and I would like to ask you, where does TBT stand in this regard? This perspective was introduced by Vivian Cook in the late 90s. And there is lots of research in this area. The perspective is multi-competence in foreign language learning, second language learning and teaching, multi-competence. Now in this approach, this perspective, Vivian Cook has highlighted that learning another language is a specific context which we need to look into in detail. Is it the case that we have two different lexicons, for instance, in the learner's mind, one for foreign language and one for native language, or it is just one lexicon, both are in the same brain? And it's just like having a house and then with one room and then adding another room into the same house. That is how this approach looks at the second language. Further, it's no longer viewed as, the context has three components, as you know. We have first language, and then we have the target language, that is the traditional context, and the interlanguage. Now, the interlanguage is the way in the middle, somewhere in the process, along the path of acquisition. And the target has been set that the learner, the second language learner, needs to aim to reach the third component, that is the target language, which is in reality impossible. There is no way for the overwhelming majority of learners to develop native-like competence. So they stay somewhere in the middle. This middle is important in this approach. This middle, this has suggested a term even for the learner. It's no longer a learner, user. So we have user one, and we have user two. And it's a process along a long path. And the learner in this approach should not be judged to the standards of a native speaker of English, but should be judged to the standards of a successful learner. Why do we use language? We use language to communicate. So after all, what is important is effective communication, though defective. Effective, though defective. You have alluded to this in answering a question raised by Mr. Magable about error correction. And Serenka has already highlighted that only 5%, less than 5% of learners develop native life competence. Now, the second issue in this regard is native speakerism. Now, in the past, there was a focus on having a native language speaker as a teacher. In this new approach, no, this is not needed. Native speaker or native speakerism is no more than a myth, since English language is no longer the property of Britishers or Americans. It's the property of the whole world. And this highlights another issue, the importance of the first language culture. That is, when we learn a second language or a foreign language, we bring to the new context, we bring our culture. And we need also to learn how to make use of this rich source. So native speakerism is an issue. Another issue is first language. Is there some room for the learner's native language to be used in this context? I mean, these are just a few ideas. How would you accommodate such ideas in the TBT approach, which you have successfully presented? This is another first issue. A second issue, the terms strong and weak. I mean, I got confused by these terms. I originally thought of strong forms in terms of verbs and weak forms and so on and so forth. Is it really the case that you mean a strong version of the approach and two weak versions of the approach rather than form? Thank you very much indeed.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Jihad, for a number of issues. I'll try to respond. I think some of them are comments and some I'll respond briefly and quickly to them. Multi-competences as an approach is a set of principles. It is not a real approach like other approaches. So it is just like Christian's natural approach and like multi-competences and other principles. So it is very much like it is a set of principles, multi-competences. It is not really an approach. So it is very much like using this strategy and that strategy. The lexicon, this is probably, it requires the whole session to talk about that. The lexicons, neuro-linguistic research tells us that there are more than one lexicon in the learner's brain. And this is debatable. Let me just give you one example. You know, when you have a person who has a brain damage or partial brain damage, what happens? He or she might lose the lexicon of one language, but not other language, meaning that the two lexicons are stored separately. I remember that a few years back, one of my colleagues here at one hospital, he showed me a person, young gentleman from Jordan. He had a car accident and his English was intermediate or higher intermediate. And of course, his first language was Arabic. What happened? He lost Arabic because he had brain damage in one part of the brain where the Arabic language was stored. So he can understand Arabic in some way, but he would respond to you in English. So what happened that the lexicon, the language, grammar of one language, which was Arabic, it was lost, but he retrieved it partially, not fully, but the English part was not stored. So brain imaging, again, shows us that they can be stored either they overlap or stored separately. Now, interlanguage, of course, definitely. We're talking about language is interlanguage according to Selinker. That was Selinker 1972 interlanguage. User not native speaker. Absolutely, you're right. I think you mentioned native speakerism. Native speakerism is a myth, and I can add it is a game. All right. The aim of language learning is not to make people speak like native speakers. A, this is impossible aim to achieve, and B, it is not necessary. Why? No, I am a non-native speaker of English. I speak fluently, and in many ways, I speak much better than native speakers in terms of writing and so on. So when we make native speakerism the goal, now we are shooting ourselves in the foot. On the one hand, this is unachievable. On the other hand, it is unnecessary. So it is a game, and I completely agree with you. Now, translanguaging, this is important. When you mentioned the use of L1 in the secondary classroom, maybe you know that in the 1970s, 1980s, in particular when it comes to communicative language teaching, to ban L1 in the classroom. Now there is a U-turn, if you like, to the use of L1 in the classroom, to acknowledge the use of L1 in the classroom. And it comes under the umbrella of translanguaging. So the world nowadays, you know, people used to call that code switching, language switching, and so on. And it used to be considered a weakness. Nowadays we use that. نتكلم عربي ونحكي انجليزي ونقول لهم فورمات الكمبيوتر وعن كسبت هذا الكلاس. So you can see I spoke a few Arabic words, a few English words. So translanguaging is part and parcel of our daily lives. And therefore nowadays it has been accepted to be an asset rather than a liability in language teaching. And I can show you, this is the latest book on translanguaging. I hope you can see the title, Envisioning TESOL, all right, through a translanguaging lens. So nowadays, the translanguaging has become an asset, which is true, all right? But we need to know how to use the L1 in the classroom to assist and promote L1 rather than to be L2, rather than to be at the expense of L2. And finally, the strong and weak form. The strong form, meaning that you are faithful to task-based language teaching. You do not teach grammar explicitly and directly. What you do it indirectly and reactively. All right? If that works, great. If it doesn't work, then you look for an alternative. If you are less faithful to TBLT, but it is good for my teaching situation, I go for the weak form. I teach it explicitly, either reactively or proactively. So there is a flexibility here. It is not one way to teach the language within the TBLT framework. I hope I was able to respond to your or most of your comments and questions, Dr. Shehad.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now we have Dr. Sayed.
I think Sayed has something.
Yes. Dr. Sayed.
Yes, sir.
Okay, your question, please.
Yeah, initially, I would like to thank Professor Ali for this valuable information. And I would like to say that I attended his lecture at UAEU, and he taught me the TBLT. I admired it, and then I immediately applied it in the classroom. It was really fantastic with my students. And I would like to reiterate one thing that Professor Ali said in this presentation and in our normal classrooms. He said that for the strong forms and weak forms, actually we have to tailor our teaching methodologies according to the levels of our students. So we have 5 options, as Professor Ali said. We can use the strong forms or the weak forms according to the level of the students. Even if I have different levels in in one classroom, I can use these 2 forms. So I can just go and vary my teaching from the strong form to the weak form as a maestro. Thank you so much for that.
My pleasure, Sayed. Thank you for your comment.
I have a question, Dr. Ali.
Yes, please go ahead, please, Dr. Shehadeh, please.
Okay, you said that a task or an activity should be goal-oriented. It has a goal and it should have an outcome and expected out of it. But how do I ask the students to read a reading passage without having something specific to look at? I think, and my own belief is that it's much better to ask the students to read a passage looking for answers to specific questions rather than asking them just read the passage with focus on main ideas. This is one thing. The other thing is that if we leave it for the students to determine the outcomes or the goals of the activity, we will end up with a number of goals and outcomes, and we will end up sometimes with a student who may not be able to know what an outcome or a goal means. So what do you think in this area?
That is very good question. Thank you, Dr. Shehadeh. It depends on the task. Sometimes we have what we call, open-ended tasks and closed tasks. We have, I hope I can remember the technical word. The task that require a specific outcome, and tasks that are open for more than one outcome. So if I have a focus and non-focused tasks. Now, if the task is focused, then you are absolutely right. Then I'd like them to achieve this and that based on the task. All right, and they do it. And if they can't, then I lead them and help them. They are focused tasks. If the task is open-ended, if it is unfocused, then it is better to have more than one option, more than one outcome. And really, the one option tasks, really they are more challenging. On the face of it, they might look simple, to do anything. But really, if you ask them, I'd like you to come with the 3 different outcomes. I'd like you to defend your outcomes, say what you have reached and why you have reached that outcome. So for example, look at the task which I gave here, the simple one, the use of AI, artificial intelligence in education. Now make a recommendation for our university whether or not to use AI in education. Now, and how and in what way. So really it is challenging, and they put themselves in the shoes of the policy makers, of the administrators. So in that way, although it is open-ended, they have more than one option, more than one outcome. But the outcome comes really from reality. It is practical. Maybe some of the outcomes might be so difficult to apply, others might be practical, and so on. In other words, it depends on the specific task you have. So we have the focused tasks, you have unfocused tasks. Okay, you have tasks that focus on one specific language skill, tasks that are multi-skill focused. So Dr. Shehadeh, there are now tasks that focus on fluency, on accuracy, on complexity, on additional content, on lexical richness. So really, there are ways to tailor the task you need. And there is a lot of research on task performance. Only today, I was evaluating a journal article for one of the top journals in the field on tasks, that how to tailor the task to focus, say, on receptive skills or on productive skills, and how to tailor them accordingly. So there is a lot of variation, but it's there. You can do that.
Thank you. Now we have a question, hand raised, Mr. Iman Yusuf.
I hope I can hear you well.
Okay, we have another question by Iman.
Yes, Dr. Shehdeh, thank you so much. Actually, it's not a question, it's a comment. I wanted to comment on the use of reading comprehension in a way or another in tasks somehow. And it can be used in the modern technologies we are facing as teachers, actually, not only using. For example, I had a recent task on I gave students a text written by an AI writer, and I asked them to critique that. Sorry? Okay. So the mic is on. So I asked, sorry, but I had Mr. Sabri, please mute your mic. Thank you. Okay, so just moving, following up on what I was saying, I used a text written by an AI writer, and I told the students, actually, it is written by an AI writer or ChatGPT, whatever it is. And they were asked some comprehension questions, 30% of the questions were comprehension and questions that can be to check their own understanding of the text. And then they were asked to critique, evaluate. If they were to change, let's say, something in the text, what would they add to make it more comprehensible and so on? So this is just one example of getting students more involved into their tasks and a more student-centered approach to holding task-based language assessment or teaching, actually. Thank you.
Any other
Thank
questions?
you, Iman. Iman is working on task-based language assessment with me under my supervision. So she is well informed and she's an expert now. And she's getting ahead of me.
No, Dr. Ali, you're always there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Imam.
Any other questions? Iman and Iman, no, they are the same. Any other questions? Dear audience? Okay, since there are no questions, then I would like to end this very informative and interactive session. Thank you, Professor Ali, for the presentation. Thanks to the audience, and thanks to the organizers of the Apetau Forum, Professor Shehadeh, Dr. Dina, and all the others. Dr. Dina, if you would like to end or to do something, and we are done.
I just want to say a few things, and I'm sure that Dr. Ali has a smile on his face. He probably wants to say something. I would just like to say that this has been such a delight, and we are so fortunate to have had you today, Dr. Ali. You have enriched our forum. Dr. Shehdeh, thank you so much for your unending support of our forum. We appreciate you, and we are very thankful that you are with us. I would like to thank Dr. Jihad and Dr. Dua. It's always a pleasure working with them. This session will be available on YouTube, hopefully tonight. And I hope that everyone with us will share it with their friends and with their colleagues. Our next session will be July 1st. I think that is the first Saturday of the month of July. And our focus will be on translation. We are in the works with, we're preparing our session with Dr. Abdul Majid Al-Ubaidi, I think. I hope I haven't butchered his name. He is from Tunisia, and he is a specialist in contrastive linguistics and translation. That's all I have. Dr. Ali, would you like to say something?
I would only like to say thank you very much indeed, Dr. Dina and your team, and Dr. Shehdah for the kind introduction, Dr. Jihad for your input, and you are an expert in the field. And quite often, I think I need to catch up with you. I don't want to compete with you, just to catch up with you. And thank you all for your attendance. I thoroughly enjoyed the seminar, the talk, right from the very beginning until now. And I hope I was able to give something that is useful, interesting, and practical. And I hope my responses were acceptable to you and to your satisfaction. Thank you very much indeed. I thoroughly enjoyed the event.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Dina, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Shehdeh. It's been great. Thank you. Very, very informative and constructive and beneficial talk. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're very proud of you, Dina, for everything you're doing. You are our star.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you so
Looking
much.
for more
Hayati Dr. Awad.
looking for more volunteers.
Dina, can I say a word?
Yeah, sure. We're waiting for you to end our session. Go ahead.
It was our pleasure and honor this evening to have Professor Ali Shehadeh with us. Professor Shehadeh is an authority in the field, and he is in the lead as well. I can't compete with Professor Shehadeh, but I can cooperate with him, and we can keep in touch and work together and think of projects, yes, working together, though taking all this distance into account, but thanks to technology, which has definitely made it possible for us to have this reunion and to work together. It was a very insightful talk. I enjoyed it, I liked it, and I think we are lucky because you accepted our invitation and you have managed to make it. Thank you very much, Professor Shehadeh, for this contribution tonight. And continue
thank you so much.
Your presence here with us and your contribution.
Thank you. I am really humbled. I am humbled and honored by the invitation and by what you said now. It is a real honor and real pleasure to be with you. And of course, we collaborate and we cooperate. We did that in the past and we'll continue to do this. I hope we can do this even more closely in the future. It will be an honor and a pleasure by me.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank our colleagues who have made it to this seminar. Your participation, contribution is of great importance to us. Thank you. We hope that you will continue to be with us. We have again, Professor Shehadeh, and we don't want to lose Professor Shehadeh again. So we wish to see him as well. Yes, and we look forward to seeing him with us in our forthcoming activities. Thank you very much. We call it a day. Thanks.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Allah يعطيك العافية.
Thank you so much. Happy to see you again, Dr. Shehadeh. Dr. Ali, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
شكرا دكتور علي. الله يعطيك العافية.
My pleasure and
عوافي
good
لكم
night
جميعاً.
everyone.